Welcome
Introduce us real quick.
everybody. Well, let us know where you're coming in from around the world. Enter into the chat box. It'd be interesting to see where everyone's joining from. We've got an awesome webinar today with someone who's been doing a lot of water restoration work for a long time and is one of our founding members of the course and doing really amazing work in the Pacific Northwest. So it's going to be a really good webinar. We'll have about an hour of presentation, Brian sharing his project and everything that is gone through. And then we'll have lots of times for question and answer at the end. We've got people from all over the place here.
Yeah, it's good seeing new faces and old faces. It's definitely like, it's always amazing. I love this part of every webinar because you see like all across the globe where people are coming in from, and especially this webinar. It's like Brian is someone who who first introduced ourselves on like a student success story webinar, and he said, "Hey, I've got something to share," and we were both blown away. Like, whoa, he has such this volume of incredible work and examples that he just like brought out of nowhere. And so now it's really awesome coming full circle and seeing his examples that we're going to share. But we have people today from Morocco and Greece and Tucson and the UK. Nico's from Greece, Ison from Turkey, Ruth from Calgary, Laura from British Columbia. I'm in Costa Rica right now. Zach's in Vermont, I believe. So we got Minnesota representing, Barcelona, Kenya. That's awesome. Coast Salish, Germany. Ron and Jack from Ventura, Janaki from Bellingham, Andreas from Deutschland, living in Peru, from the Netherlands. Awesome. So really, we got everybody here. We got pretty much the Northern Hemisphere, a little bit of the South. Like anyway, it's probably because of the time zone, we're missing a lot of Australia, but you know what? That's all right. We'll get them later. And a little bit
New
of
Zealand.
Asia. Yeah, we got some New Zealand. That's awesome. Thanks for
One
coming.
of my favorite places.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I'm missing so much. Well, I know for a lot of us in the Northern Hemisphere, we're dealing with the beginning of winter, the beginning of rain season, and we're gonna have some really great examples about what you do when this season comes about. So I know Zach probably already mentioned this, but this is all being recorded. Brian's going to have an excellent presentation. Then we're going to move to Q&A afterwards. So, you want to be present. Make sure you turn off any distracting things because there's going to be a lot into this. And like always, you'll get an email about a webinar replay after. So without further ado, Zach, I know I kind of jumped in here. If there's anything else you want to share about Brian before we start, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, it's really an awesome pleasure to have Brian on. He's one of the mainstays of all of our professional development sessions, one of the most committed members to the water story community, was already doing a lot of work before he joined the course and then joined the course and has really just been a shining example of both real world projects and making those happen and also community building and outreach, and just participated in the Regenerate Cascadia tour, and was one of the shining examples as far as on the ground pieces of that tour. Has done really amazing work. They do workshops. They have a PDC every year. They do farm tours. He does consulting and design and implementation for other projects as well. So without further ado, Brian, it's an honor to have you on as your own solo Water Stories webinar.
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, Zach and Raleigh for inviting me and allowing me to kind of chime in, share a little bit of my story journey and stuff, kind of slow and steady how we got here and our involvement. And I've really appreciated the work that both of you have done and stuff over the years and followed along, and I'm glad to be part of that journey and sharing this out with the wider community. So really appreciate your work on this as well. So yeah, I've got a lot of slides. I kind of did a quick Raleigh asked me if I'd be interested in doing this, and I'm like, okay, this was just 3 weeks ago or something, and I'm like, okay, let's see if I can pull together something. So I did a little mashup of past presentations, and so this is what I came up with. A couple of things. So there's a lot of slides. We're kind of going to go through them pretty quick, and to get through them, and then leave enough time for question and answer and stuff towards the end. So let's see. I will go ahead and whoop. Where did my? Oh, there's the share screen, and we'll start with this.
And folks, as we're going, if you have questions as we're going through, enter them into the question and answer feature. We'll try and answer simple questions in the chat as we go, but at the end, we're going to have a lot of time to answer questions, and that question and answer feature is the best place to stash your questions for the end.
Yeah, stash them away.
Absolutely. And feel free to you can drop links in the chat box and connect with one another while we're going through this. But like Brian's got a powerhouse of a presentation here, so we'll try to keep it to around an hour, but this is going to be really cool. So let it rip.
Yeah, so I'm seeing my cursor doesn't really show up on there, but it's okay. I was going to point out some stuff as we go along, but maybe I'll just have to describe it. So I just wanted to give kind of a context for everyone of where we're located on the planet. So we're right up near the Canadian border in the far northwest corner of Washington State. This is the traditional homeland of the Coast Salish nations of the Nooksack and Lummi tribes that have stewarded this landscape for generations, tens of thousands of years in symbiotic relationship with the water and with the land and with all its inhabitants. And so just really want to acknowledge that. And the other thing I wanted to point out is, so we're in this Nooksack River Basin, which is circled in red on the left there. And I just really find it fascinating how this whole, the Salish Sea, which this whole region has all of this water that flows through it. And how that, to me, looks like a giant placenta. It's just has that main vein that comes in, and then all these arteries that come and connect. And so it's really this bastion of life that is in this region. It's surrounded by mountains. You can see on the little artist rendering there. So it's cradled in this little nest of life and water and interaction between land and sea and mountains. And so that's kind of the general context. Closer in context, this is kind of, our farm is surrounded by that red outline there, and the neighbor's farm is in the blue that he's been regenerating old horse pasture. But we're flanked on the back by this large gravel pit. And so it's this constant reminder of the earth being, mined for resources and habitat being destroyed and stuff. And so even though we're creating this amazing oasis here, there's this other thing happening right behind us all the time. And so we're looking at ways we can regenerate that eventually down the line. So the other photo is a photo we got when we bought the place. It kind of shows what probably around 1960 or so, traditional row crop cornfield, and very few trees and tons of tilled landscape in there. And then our overall context has been getting more and more extreme every year. We had record floods a couple of years ago. Hundreds of homes were, basically destroyed. And we also had incredible heat waves. So Inspiration Farm is, you can see on the heat there in map, there's Vancouver Island. And then just right off the southeast tip of Vancouver Island is Bellingham. And so we're right in the middle of the hottest part of that heat dome, which was incredibly destructive. There was fires up in BC, there was smoke all over the place. So this is the kind of situations we're dealing with, and I'm sure it's not uncommon in other parts of the world as well. I see it all the time. So now we'll launch into kind of a bit of history of Inspiration Farm, and then how we're looking at coping with some of these changes and working with what we have landscape. So we've been here for nearly 30 years. You know, we've raised our family, and the evolution of the farm went hand in hand with the evolution of our family. You know, it was really an outgrowth of wanting to raise our kids in a really wholesome kind of environment and feed them good food, and have them connected to nature and their surroundings. So originally we moved here in 94. So it was a 9-acre property. It's kind of an old view that had infrastructure. You can see here buildings, some old orchard, trees, basic, you know, water and power, septic, kind of that kind of stuff. But we weren't really moving here for farming. That wasn't our original thought. I'm a glass artist. So we were looking at a studio building, and my wife had a business. So we were looking at the infrastructure buildings. That being said, I've always had a garden and always liked working with the nature and stuff. So we liked that we had space, and there was some existing fruit trees and so forth. Around 2006, we really shifted gears and started going, you know, we had 2 kids at that point. How do we start feeding them good food? How do we raise good, healthy meat? You know, how do we work with animals? And so we started really looking at the property more as a whole and integrating a lot of different diversity and trees. And we had goats and chickens and ducks, way too many animals early on in the system. It kind of drives you crazy, but it was educational. You know, just really kind of dove into it full bore. And one of the first real challenges was in the winter months. It was so wet, we just had water sheeting everywhere through the property, and it was like, how do you get control of this water? And you know, we had taken permaculture design courses, and we have been studying that. Alexandra actually took the first permaculture design course, my wife, with the bullocks out on Orcas Island. And we realized, okay, water is a resource, and you know, the problem is your solution. And how do you integrate water into the landscape rather than shunt it off, which is what the previous owners had done. They had just basically ditched the property, run things off, tried to dry things out, but the water would still sheet everywhere. So this was my first attempt at trying to integrate water into the landscape. It's a very centrally located depression that was part of their original ditching it off the property. And I kind of put it more on contour and tried to hold more of it and made it larger as a first step to integrate that water. And then we had this water, so it sheeted and actually flooded out buildings. Like we would have 2 inches of standing water in some of our buildings. And so it was this swale and then a conveyance ditch that went kind of winded its way down slope around the buildings so that the buildings weren't getting flooded. So it was really just kind of an original architecture for moving that water. And as you can see, the kids loved it. We had, you know, it was a long, narrow little pond that played in the canoes back and forth in there for hours. So and this kind of shows over time, this little swale / pondy area in 2007, and then here's more recently. So tons of growth, just flourishes on the edge on the swale berms, And I started going, okay, how do we integrate this more throughout the landscape? So a little bit later, I did my first little pond project. Very simple. Use what you have, do what you can, kind of get something going and get some experience. So I basically got out there and just kind of bucketed and box bladed out a little pocket pond in one of the other pastures that was really, really wet in the season. And it worked, and the kids loved that too. So as we moved forward, I started looking more at contours. We added more mulch, more pasture management, started saving seeds and stuff, which is really key to our evolution. And I started really understanding how to read the landscape and look at things in natural patterns that were presenting themselves. So very simple things like this is an example of pine needles, how they collect and flow in the driveway runoff. And it's like it set my mind to thinking of patterning in the landscape on how you would place swales or terraces and connections between those, and the patterns, the intervals, the degree of how they integrate with the slope and stuff. And so really learning to observe and take your clues from what's actually naturally happening in the landscape. And then I tried to put some of that practice into the landscape initially by putting very simple like contour lines through the landscape by tilling initially, just using basic A-frames, and then converting some of the upper pasture into, initially we had a lot of annual garden beds. So, initially tilling and then eventually using a broad fork and doing a lot of annual farming up in that area. Looking closer at the contour lines, trying to get a better picture of the patterns that emerged and evolved, and trying to adjoin. We got an additional piece of property adjoining ours, so it started looking at how that water flowed from one piece of property to the next and integrating those things. We started doing a lot more class events. So this is a class, we're building a large Hugelkultur. We've put in a number of Hugelkulturs over the years here because we just have a lot of tree debris, and it's like a really good thing to do with all that biomass is just soak it in. So here you can see, one put in right behind my studio building, and then later that fall, there it is. We have a adjoining swale. It's a Hugel swale. I know there's controversy on Hugel swales, but we have several. They work okay. They're slightly off contour, so we do have flow through, but it really does charge those Hugelkulturs. You rub water up against it. So here's another feature we put in, put it in 2 days, and it's like an amazing feature. It's dug, planted, and cover cropped. And it is one of our main productive swale features and connects 2 ponds together. This is upper property that was basically all swampy land. We got cattle. They couldn't even walk through here. They would sink up to their knees in goo. And it's like, how do you look at the top of your water catchment and start controlling the way the water moves through that? And then concentrate the water, concentrate the land, make the land usable, and make the water soak in. So it helped infiltrate that water. It helped me get control of where that water flows and how it moves down landscape. And it also helped harvest the nutrient load that was up where our more livestock was arranged. So there's like looking down through the systems when there's water in there. First filling of some of these longer swales through the landscape. All of these were put in kind of piecemeal. They weren't put in all in one contiguous thing because oftentimes there was crops in the way or other things. So sometimes I'll put, a 50 or 75-foot section in. And then the next season I go, oh, I should extend that. So I'll put another section in. Likewise with a lot of my water bodies, initially they started as a small little tractor dugout test pond, and then eventually I would dig them out into a larger, more full-featured, keyed in dam type pond if it warranted it. So this kind of shows really big overview of kind of our connected systems. The swales fill up multiple times through the winter. They soak in. I really like looking at these systems when they're when it's snowy and ice is on top, because you can really see how that water is slowly moving. What's moving, what's not moving, what's soaking in. Like they'll freeze over, and then as that water soaks in, the ice forms a depression, as it's collapsing, because the water underneath is disappearing down into the earth. So you can really visualize how the water is moving in the soil at those times of year. So this is just a quick video showing a major rain event, and
heavy fall overflows working as they should, coming down through here and back flooding out this swale system, connecting to the other swan as it slows, spreads, and sinks all across the entire property. The front pond is still not full. Contrast to last year.
the front pond is the lowest pond on the property.
Secondary swale is completely full all the way across the landscape, including some of the footpaths between the beds. Now moving into the distance. Still hasn't overflowed yet. We'll monitor as we go.
So it's coming down through the conveyance ditch and filling up subsequent swales. This one just recently got widened, but I can see it needs to get lengthened as well. There's the overflow. It goes on down that way.
Around those
Okay,
buildings.
here we go. First time there's water flowing out of this pipe that is coming all the way down that pipe from the roof of my studio building. So we have finally connected up roof catchment overflow to my studio building. And it's making it all the way up here to the point. I'll show you what's going on down there. Okay, here's the setup. There's the roof off the studio. Here's the collection system. Right here. There it comes off of the gutters through a filter and into this IVC tank. And it's all tight lined so that when it back floods all the way up to where that T is, it flows off this direction and down this little 1-inch pipe and all the way uphill to the pond. How do you make water flow uphill? You don't. Water seeks its own level. And you just make sure that that point is higher than where you want it to go. I'm excited.
All right, so that was kind of a messy water situation, and that rain event caught me off guard. I hadn't gotten finished like grading out or seeding and cover cropping around that new water body revamp. And so I got to that a little bit the following spring as soon as I could get back on there. And the roof catchment water was something that I had wanted to do for a long time. I finally got that installed, and calculated out just catching off half of my roof and that line was all buried and is sized up and reconfigured at this point. But that was a test setup. But calculated out, if I get a 1/4 inch rain event, that puts 500 gallons of water into that pond. So that's, you know, pretty significant if you get a light rain event during the spring or even in the summer to help keep that pond topped off. Because those lighter rain events, most of that water will just soak into the ground and not be flowing over, which is what most of that catchment in that water body is from. So tying in roof structures are really key to keeping water bodies topped off. And I would add gray water systems to that ability as well. So this is kind of a look at where we are more or less now. Kind of a schematic of the farm. So we have, you know, much more integration. We've been saving over 85 different varieties of seed crops, more animal integration, connection between things. We're reviving our pasture through rotational grazing and key line ripping in those areas. So it evens out the hydration. And right now we have, you know, installed over the years 6 large Hugelkulturs, 12 sails, and 6 ponds. And that's holding roughly calculated out, you know, 850,000 gallons of water when all the systems are full. So we're probably right, and I just added another pond at the top right-hand corner there, and we'll see a little bit of that. So we're probably close to 1 million gallons of water being held on the property. That video was a major rain event that we had. That was the event where Linden and those other floods that happened in the first slide. Other places were flooding out, but we captured and stored all of that water here on the landscape and soaked it in. And as a result of that, we've actually have neighbors that their wells used to run dry. 4 or 5 years ago, their wells were running dry in the summer, and now they don't run dry. And I think a large part of that is because we're recharging the aquifer. Our aquifer is maybe 50 or 60 feet down for most wells in this area. So we have the potential to recharge that through the work that we've done here at Inspiration Farm. So everything's connected. One flows from one to the next. It buffers against, you know, these floods, fires, and droughts, creating, you know, green, lush landscapes in the summer, and able to absorb all of those major events of flooding and stuff during the winter, and without flooding our buildings, which is really key. So that creates a resilient abundance farm. So here's a more recent aerial photo of the farm, and just you have the water, just things grow like crazy. We have lots of produce, lots of seeds, lots of habitat, lots of wildlife, and a lot of resilience because of that. So I'm just quickly go through some of the community engagement stuff that we've been doing. We do classes and tours and workshops and all of these different things, seed gardens, volunteer days. So really a big part of what we want to be doing is engaging with the community and showing paths towards resilient futures and abundance. How do we work with these changing times? And we do this in all kinds of different ways. Recently, I've been doing more and more speaking engagements, working with people on various projects. My design consultations and stuff have been kind of taking off more than I can deal with. So we just like sharing what we do with people. So we have school groups that come, everything from young grade schools all the way up to university level. I just had a class of 20 people here yesterday from a food justice course up at Western. We teach workshops. These are some of our permaculture design workshop students. Show them the animals, the soil, the water, talk about water, the importance of the small water cycle, all these things in community. And then we share a lot of this stuff out to a broader community with the help of our friends Andrew and Mary, who put together a virtual tour. And let's see if we can get this to work. It will link us. So this is a virtual tour.
Brian, I think you need to swap your screen share.
Okay, that's right.
To the browser there.
So let's share this again to Chrome. Okay. There we go.
Yep. There you go.
So this is a virtual tour. So this is kind of a 3D model that you can kind of rotate around. But then any of these little eye icons, you can click on these and it'll zoom you in to the farm as it's buffering. So it'll zoom you into the farm, and there's all these little spots that you can 3D pan around. And then there's like information icons that you can click on that show you more about what's happening in that space. There's little video clips that are in here. And then there's these arrows that'll take you to the next location on the tour. So it's a way that we can share these kind of systems with a much wider audience. And they can interact with these. And Andrew and Mary are working on putting these tours together for a number of other farms in the area, to be able to convey these positive examples of demonstration sites, really, of what is possible. So I think this is a really powerful tool to reach out, and I'm thankful to be working with them on these kind of projects. And this will be an ongoing evolution. I mean, this is kind of a framework that's there, but it can be added onto. So just wanted to show that, and I will go back to my other presentation. Whoops. Let's see. I have to go. It's not letting me. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry about this. Have to juggle around here a little bit.
All good.
And then we will get back to play slideshow. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Looks good.
So yeah, feel free to check them out. They're at edgeperma.com, and you can see what other work that they're working on as well. This is all these tech tools are just coming out. They're really powerful. They have a lot of potential to help inspire people to do similar things. So we're like kind of mentioned in the little write-up, we have so many different enterprises and operations going on. So we do tours, workshops, all this stuff. We also run a nursery, which originally started to extend our own systems out and plant things out. But the passion for plant propagation is there. So it's now turned into a small enterprise. So I do design consultations, I sell plants, I look for really unique things that work in our area and propagate those up. We have a farm stand. We have a lot of unusual things that people come by, and then they go, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And then we give them a little look around, so it's a way to engage the public in kind of what is possible in regenerative agriculture and regenerative lifestyles. And then I'm very involved in one of the founders of the Sailor Seed Guild, which started over 20 years ago. We did a seed swap and kind of have had seed swaps in the area for the last 20 something years. but several years ago, I like, let's teach people how to save seeds. So we started a seed garden here at Inspiration Farm, and we grow all these different seeds out, and then we share them back with the community. So you can find out more about this at salishseed.org. And we have work parties and volunteer things, and we teach people how to select, harvest, grow seeds. And then we take those, we package them up, and we share these back with the community. So these are, open pollinated, locally adapted, heirloom varieties that are right for our climate and environment. And we teach people about seed stewardship and how important it is to steward seeds from year to year in a local region so that they adapt to climate change as it's going. So it's not seeds you get from a distant area, they come together. We do work parties and all kinds of different, simple workshops to full-on workshops. This is, our earth compost building and guild planning. We do recently, the last 4 years, I've done Earthworks workshops as well that are on clients' properties. So these are actual projects, but students get involved in them, and we do design exercises, presentations, model building, all that stuff, and get a project done. Full permaculture design courses, try and really focus on hands-on aspects of it, as well as classroom time, but really do a lot of hands-on projects in with that. So this is just a little example of the Earthworks course we did this year in August. And this is a top pond that I'd wanted to do for a while here. So on the top photo was the, what the site looked like before we started. And there's a little test hole to the left, bottom left of that top photo. And then kind of partway through the process, we got it all dug out, and then the finished water body as it's starting to grow in, and it's still not full yet, but it's getting there. The spillway for that is kind of the right-hand side there. You can see a little bit of rock spillway, and that goes out in towards that mound, which is a Hugelkultur that dealt with all the debris and stuff from clearing this site. And it acts as a shock absorber to hold and slow release that water as it comes out. So here's another side of it. And I really want to put a shout out. There was 3 students from Water Stories that came, Hua, Aaron, and Oha, that came and participated in this course. And it was a really good group. And we were able to, basically from a pretty rough site here to completion in just under 5 days. So, and several of those were just kind of looking at it and doing some exercises. So Aaron helped fall some trees. All the students got to, operate equipment. You can see on the left photo there's the test pond that was the obstacle in making this, is leaving that water and digging out the rest of it before we let that water into our work area. So it was kind of a staged thing. And then just launch into and quickly go through some of the projects. So here's a map of Whatcom County. There's Inspiration Farm kind of in the center there. And then all these blue dots are projects that I've done throughout the county. And so these are projects that I've actually done, but I've done quite a bit more design and consultation for clients that I have not done projects for. They've either done them themselves, or they just wanted somebody to hold their hand on things. So, and this is just since like 2018 or so that I felt confident enough to be able to do projects for other people on these scopes. So one of the early ones we did, and I'm just going to go through these pretty quick, but I wanted to highlight a couple of unique aspects on some of them. This one is a project that they had a lot of pesticide residue and other toxic gick that was flowing onto the site from upslope neighbors. So on this map, the lower portion, the bottom portion is the highest part of the slope, and then the big pond on the top is the lowest part. So we put in a big swale catchment system and then two reed bed filters that came into the site. And much like this diagram, only in reverse a little bit. So as the water came onto the property, it was all collected along this swale berm, and it had to pass through two of these reed bed filters. And so we put in this gravel reed bed. There's baffles that are put through there, so the water has to go back and forth around those baffles before it enters into these two barrels. So these barrels have holes drilled in the bottom of them. The water comes up in through the bottom on the outside of the barrel, up inside the barrel, and then that the pipe goes inside the barrel and 90 degrees and goes up, and it sets the level. So the height of the pipe sets the level of the water in that reed bed filter. And then those barrels are also filled with biochar. So that charcoal filters the water as it goes through there. So here's the finished install of that system. It's catching all that. And then we planted bamboo and reed bed or reeds and stuff in that gravel bed. So that's the initial filter. And then where that water comes out of those barrels, it flows into a micro remediation zone. That's mushroom sheet spawn. And that is the final filtration. And we had this tested, and the water coming out of it showed an 85% reduction in toxic gick that was going through it. So the lower left photo, you can see the barrels. We put some concrete pads on top so that the lids you can kind of open and check your level and check it, see if everything's flowing okay. And then that white pipe there, you can look in, and that's perforated, so it just can show you the level of the water that's in that reed bed. So we wanted that water to be below the level of the rocks, but still flowing, not tons of water on the top, which you can see on the right. There's a lot of water on the top, but that was again a peak event. Then we did this other large project, put in a large swale. It's not exactly, we didn't put in all of these systems, but we put in 3 of the ponds and 1,500 feet of the swales and the Hugelkultur. So up against the road, we did the step swale kind of system that it's off contour, but he didn't want it on contour because it went in the pasture. So we pushed it up against the fence, went off contour, but by stepping it down, you could create level spaces so that water can soak in. And then one of the goals was really to have a buffer from the road. On the right side, there's a fairly busy county road. And so that created a planting berm, a water soakage system, and a buffer from the road. There was also a lot of debris on site. So we cleared up all that debris, built a large Hugelkultur that water rubbed up against. So here you can see in that back, the step swale is up against that road. It kind of curves around, and then it flows up against this Hugelkultur, which was dug down in. So it's like underground pond, but it wasn't a swale per se. It was falling off contour. And then that circled around to that center. The major pond there is in the middle of that field. So this kind of moderated the water in that field, made it usable during the wet months, and then kept it hydrated during the dry months. So it made that pasture a lot more usable throughout the entire year. And then we put in a pond down lower. There's a time lapse here, which I'm not going to do. There's the finished pond. There's the pond in relation to the house. So it was really a nice feature, just right off right off the house, brought wildlife, and it actually provided a crossing where the excavator sitting there was a valley. So it provided, the dam wall provided a nice crossing from the house to their barn area. That was actually quite a bit of a shortcut for them to go on a daily, walk to their barn area. And we did another project. This was the first one that I did that was a workshop project. So kind of a weird shaped property. They had a lot of saturated ground and a lot of disconnected water systems. So it was really working towards connecting those waterways together, adding a couple of water bodies, and then creating a lot of planting space. So the field C and field B, there's 2 swales in there, and then right below where the nut tree zone is, there's another swale in there. We put in all 3 of those, and then we put in that top pond that's at the 131-foot level at the very top of the property. And this kind of aerial shows the neighbors had ponds. So it was like, how do you tie into the neighbors' ponds? How do you work all these systems together? So this was kind of over ambitious project. We got, had too much to do and too little time and too small of equipment. So kind of shows the finished results, but it took way longer than we anticipated. This is the pond view. We had way too small of an excavator for this pond, so I suggested, just leave an island in the middle, and then you don't have to move all that material out of there. So this is just, shortly after we finished, and the water started coming. Those mounds on the backside, those are all Hugelkulturs. This is all like scrub brush debris that we had to clear out of the way, which is what was supposed to happen before the workshop started, but it didn't. So we got kind of caught up in dealing with that. So there's another view of that with the spillway. Then very simple things. I did this for co-housing unit down on Woodby Island. They had lots of debris. I built this berm, Hugelkultur style berm, that pulled water off the road and cycled it around to the drier parts. And it created a kind of a buffer or planting berm, and dealt with a lot of the water that was running down the road and causing road erosion, pulling that back towards the ridge line. And then this is a neighbor pond. We did, you start doing this stuff, you infect your neighbors, and they like, ooh, what are you doing? I want some of that. So talked him into doing this project and put it in just in time for the rains again. And it kind of connects to our systems as well. And I'm just going to run through this quick. The basic stuff: scooping soil, building up the dam wall, and then the finished site. And you can see it kind of wraps around his garden area. That finger swale, he really didn't want to put that in, but I'm like, look, this'll catch water and bring it into your pond. And when the pond's full, it'll back flood out that way, and it'll help hydrate your whole garden area. And so like, he wanted the pond for real first, and then I like talked him into this finger swale, and it's been a really good thing. The last year was super dry. This year was super dry too, and he said he didn't have to irrigate any of that stuff. Okay, we made it through, and we're doing good on time. So this is kind of just overview. I do these kind of presentations. I always plug water stories. There's a number of other local places. I need to put regeneratecascadia.org, so check that out too. But yeah, you can take screenshots on here if you want to put this in your notebook. I've also started kind of putting together a page on our website that's really talking about water and climate. I love following along with so many other people starting to work in this space. how important water is in relation to climate change, and starting to manage how we look at the global climate, not with just a carbon emission lens on our face. You know, there's so many other things that are affecting it. So that's it for me, and I'll stop sharing. We can chat, or we can go back to any of these slides if you want, or yeah.
Awesome. Great
Thanks.
work, Brian. I mean, great
Yeah,
presentation
excellent.
and just fantastic work that you've been doing there, really spearheading this movement in the Cascadia bioregion. Yeah, lots of good feedback in the chats. We'll make sure that it all gets relayed to you. Lots of people gaining a lot from what you shared here.
Yeah.
We're gonna, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I guess I would just say, like, you know, I don't know how I ended up here. You know, sometimes you just go down a road and like one thing leads to the next and stuff. And if like somebody told me, oh, you're going to be like water cycle restoration practitioner / farmer / seed saver / whatever, you know, 30 years ago, I'm like, yeah, right, sure. But you know, one thing leads to the next, and it's really a lifestyle that is very fulfilling. You know, it's like it brings a lot of joy, and I see a lot of joy in other people, and that's kind of been the main driving force. And I see not only joy in people, but joy in the birds and the deer and all of the wildlife that shows up because you're doing the right thing. Like the ecosystem response is amazing, what happens when you embrace these kind of systems.
Absolutely. That's for me, that's always the biggest reward to projects. And before starting Water Stories, I think that was the main reason I did projects, is all of the non-human relatives and everything that they benefit from it, from the bees coming to drink to the mountain lions coming to check out projects to everyone in between. And I'll say too, I think it's just been so uplifting and hopeful and awe-inspiring to see you and all of the other people in the community in the course really doing this work. I think it's amazing that we see all these people. Some of them have previous professional experience, some of them don't, some of them have previous knowledge, some of them don't. But to see them all moving into action, really creating projects on the ground. And then as you're seeing there, the neighbors want it, other people in the community wants it. As soon as you get those first couple of examples in the ground, it really starts to spread like wildfire.
Yeah. And what was kind of unexpected to me was, you know, I never thought of myself as a public speaker and stuff. And I've just been getting requests from, you know, the conservation district or the farm organization or the city council, or, you know, these different groups. It's like, can you come speak about water, and can you, you know, or seed saving or whatever it is, you know. But, you know, it's like, and then you feel, oh, I am a container for a certain knowledge base, and you feel compelled to share that.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times the best presenters are hesitant to present because they always feel like, oh, I don't know enough. I know I didn't teach a course for years and years and years because I said, you know, I'm still learning. There's no way I'm going to teach other people. But then you look around the room and you realize, oh, actually, I have a lot of knowledge to share to most of the people here. And I think that is no doubt why your presentations are so well received, why you're being asked back into new places. And I think that, you know, beginner's mentality, the always learning mentality, really helps create good educators in the end, when we don't look at things as a settled fact, but rather an evolving situation and continue to evolve with it.
Yeah. We're grateful to have you on, Ben. It's so cool seeing this happen it's kind of like if you're in the Pacific Northwest, right in your backyard. I think so much of us think to see great permaculture examples. Oh, we might have to fly to Zaytuna Farm in Australia. And meanwhile, like, you know, you've been doing this for decades and you're just right there. And it's so amazing seeing this work, you know, and it may not have been lived on YouTube for a decade, and yet you have this depth of incredible examples that we can all learn from. So we're super grateful for you to sharing that to all of us.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, like I said, we didn't, you don't know where you're going unless you start, right? So originally the name Inspiration Farm came from, like, both my wife and I are artists, and we taught art camps to kids, and I taught glass blowing classes. So like our tagline is we cultivate creativity, and we weren't a farm, you know, but now it's like we've grown into this name, Inspiration Farm, being an inspiration for the community on so many other aspects. And you know, we've seen some really amazing people come out of the experiences that they've had here. You know, people that come in grade school and get kind of an awe-inspiring moment, and they come back years later and tell me stories about going to college, and now they have a career that's like running a farm and doing like all this regenerative approaches and thinking outside the box. And I'm like, whoa, really? Like that was like the seed was planted on your first trip visiting here or something. So you don't know kind of your reach. It's
What
like,
an amazing manifestation of that name, huh? You think you named it that way, and now you are this inspiration to so many people.
yeah.
I think it's so important that you're getting the school groups out there, getting people exposed to this as young individuals. It's so hard to relearn things rather than just to learn them the first time. And I think this is why we see a lot of the best examples come from people who are non-farmers, who don't have a farming background, because they're ready to totally reconceptualize what farming is and what interacting with the landscape and having a relationship with it means. And I see also a lot artists do particularly well in this field, because it's about creative expression and inspiration and interacting and intuition. I think people like to try and make this recipe book out of it, but relating with the land is really not a recipe book. It really is more of a creative endeavor. And I think you do a great job of showing that.
Yeah, I think I realized early on, like, read the Permaculture Designer's Manual and all these other books, and they have these recipes, and I'm like, you try someone, it's like, that's not really working in my context. It's not my experience. And so you just like, okay, we'll try something else. So it's really like, I'm a glass blower. I'm working with like molten mediums that's moving and flowing, and I'm dancing with that to coax out the expression that I want to see in that. Well, in the landscape, it's the same thing. Like, how do you dance in that space and observe and react to the conditions within that environment, to coax out what you know, the best parts of it.
That's exactly it. That's the aim that I think we're all going for, and really the way to get there too is in that dynamic relation. So we're going to open it up for audience questions here pretty soon. I've got just a few questions I got at the tip of my tongue here for you, Brian. But
Sure.
folks, we've got a lot in the question and answer. You can keep entering them there, and then we will let a few people ask questions with their voice as well. So
yeah, if you want to do a live question, just, there's the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom bar. Just click that, and we'll get to you when we have a little bit of time.
But Brian, I wanted to ask first off, you're someone who, even before the course was really engaged in this work and learning about it and actually doing it. What led you to take the course, and how did it help you?
Yeah, great question. So I'm always, continuing ed is always a great thing. And part of it is to learn other people's contexts and experiences. How does that fit in with my own? And then part of it is to just be with a community of like-minded people that want to be working kind of on the same page and flow. And I've really found like the Water Stories community amazing, of people with a really diverse skill set and backgrounds already, and diverse contexts. You know, so that is wonderful, and I really enjoy being part of that community and contributing to that community. I guess originally, like, so I've learned about Sepp Holzer years ago. I know Paul Wheaton, who's like was instrumental in getting him over, I guess, for some of the workshops that I really wanted to go to those. But running a farm, it has its problems. Like, it's hard to get away and stuff when you want to. So it was not really feasible for me to get away to some of those workshops. But then I learned you were like mentoring with him, and I'm like, cool, somebody from the area that's going to like tease out all these nuggets of information. And so I met you at the Earth Repair conference, and then it was like, okay, cool. It's like, Zach's cool. I'd like to hang out more with him. And so yeah, that was kind of like, okay, I'm doing this, and signed up for the course. But, you know, just in general, like, I've done 4 different PDCs from different people. I took Jeff Lawton's online PDC because I wanted a bigger, like a global context and a global community of students to bounce ideas off of. I'm always like doing this, expand your mind and then focus in on the project at hand, kind of that back and forth polarity of things. And then, you know, what I've really gotten out of the Water Stories course is just a much stronger confidence to that I'm on the right track, and I can, you know, like, it took us a long time to evolve our systems here, but I can go to a client site and I can, like, in a few days easily come up with like the mainframe design that's going to work, you know, and we can phase that. Like, you can put in this feature and that feature, and then down the road you can put in these other features, that kind of thing. Like, so you can phase implement it, which is what I always suggest, not like do the whole thing whole hog and get yourself in over your head. So, you know, I feel really confident I can go and do those kind of design projects with you know, your mentoring and my experience and stuff. It's like there's certain commonality, you know, common things that's like, yeah, that's what you do. This is, you know, this is what you look for. This is that kind of thing. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. You said one thing that really stood out to me, that wells of the neighbors that had gone dry don't go dry anymore. I'm curious, have the neighbors noticed this, and do they connect it at all with your actions, or do they think it's just circumstance or act of God, or have you discussed it with any of them?
Yeah, a couple of them are, you know, good friends, and I have discussed it with them. And then I've heard anecdotally from others that were not super aware of it. You know, but like, people come over the middle of summer when all the neighboring fields are like dry and ours are still green, you know, and they're like, what's going on here? You know, it's what, and everything's hot and our area is like cool. You know, we have the, you know, tree systems growing up. You know, we've got the small water cycle, the humidity in the air that's still cycling around, and they're like, people don't even know how to put a finger on it. A lot of times they're just like, whoa, what's happening, you know? So that's kind of interesting. No, I'd love to get more, you know, that more scientific data, I guess. You know, we talk in the Water Stories of like document and you know, getting data and stuff. It's really hard. Like, I didn't get baseline data ahead of time, but I know people were running out of water. They were hauling water in, for drinking water. And they were talking about drilling deeper wells, and I'm like, no, don't do that. Like, so yeah, there are solutions. There's Ferndale, which is the town just not far from us. 3 of their municipal water systems ran out of water this summer, and they're right by the coast, and they're talking about drilling deeper wells. And I'm like, you're going to get saltwater intrusion. You're going to, like, you need to just start recharging, create water soakage cities that are going to recharge that aquifer. I mean, it's, in the 100-foot range aquifer. So it's approachable. Anyway.
Yeah. It's, it's kind of heartbreaking in a way when the things we know and you see how people are going about things. It's this weird mix of a feeling of impending doom and also hopefulness, because we know how simple it could be to fix these things. And yet we see that in many cases, we're just headed exactly in the wrong direction. And I'm just grateful for people like you who are, learning, sharing, and presenting to others what options we have on the table so that people can start to make better decisions.
Yeah.
So with that,
got some other questions.
Yeah, we've got a whole bunch in the question and answer that we'll start going through with you. And if you've asked a question in the question and answer and you want to ask your question live, please raise your hand. And then also, if you want to ask your question live, you can raise your hand as well. I'm going to start working through these maybe from the bottom up, just for relevancy. Brian, what happened to the farm during the heat dome that you mentioned?
Well, during the heat dome, yeah, it was pretty severe, just in the surrounding area. Like you can imagine, there was fires burning in BC. There was, fields that were droughted. The raspberry crop was dismal, which Whatcom County is berry and dairy. So they're growing corn for dairy farms and berries, blueberries and raspberries primarily. And they're aerial irrigating all that stuff. The berries just basically shriveled up and burned on the bushes, a lot of them. So they had terrible crop. Our farm, we had some sunburn damage on some fruit, but the majority of it was fine. We don't irrigate in the conventional sense, irrigate any of our annual crops. Like we don't run any sprinklers or soaker hoses on anything except for in my nursery, things that are in pots. We have to irrigate that or water it periodically. But anything that's in the ground, the water is stored in the ground. And so we had in the hottest days, we had dew and mist and condensation and all of those small water cycle features that were cycling the moisture that was stored in the soil, was cycling it numerous times back into the system. So you could go out and grab a handful of mulch in the middle of August and squeeze it in the morning, and you would get dew drip coming out of it because that mulch system had all that surface area, and you would get condensation on all of those little straw particles of that mulch. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. What an example. I'm going to combine a couple of these questions too, and we'll just have a little bit beefier ones for you. But a question from Ben and also from Andreas. How do you approach the use of heavy equipment on your property and others? Do you own or rent, and do you run it yourself or hire an operator? And building on that, where did you learn to work with machinery?
Yeah, good question. So early on, I would rent a tractor maybe once or twice a year and save up projects and do things. Later, we got our own tractor. So for the last, whatever, 15 or 18 years, something like that, we've had a tractor on site, not large, like, 28 horse, or now I think we upgraded to like a 40 horse tractor with a box blade and a grader blade. And, mostly I use it for moving materials, moving mulch, wood chips, compost, logs. We got a variety of attachments. I just got a wood chipper so we can chip brush, stuff like that, with it. But most of the time, for projects, I rent equipment. And I guess originally some of my projects, I would work with another equipment operator. And so I've worked with a couple of different equipment operators, and most of which are challenging because they're used to just doing construction, like foundations and roads and ditches. And they didn't really listen to kind of the design project thoroughly, and didn't quite understand it. So there's a lot of back and forth and time explaining things. I did find one operator that was pretty good and kind of excited to learn this stuff. And I worked with him on a number of projects, and I really learned how to operate equipment from him. The excavators and such. I mean, a tractor, like, I can deal with that. And so that's what got my confidence level up. And now a lot of times I'll just rent the size appropriate equipment and do the operations myself most of the time. Unless it's too big of a project, and then I'll try and pull somebody else in to help with it. So yeah, just little by little, getting familiar with it, and then getting a confidence up. But renting is really preferable to owning your own equipment. Like, most of the time, if you owned your own, it'd be sitting in storage, or you'd have to be doing maintenance on it. You want different size equipment for different projects. And so you can just rent in the size appropriate stuff. It's all maintained. It's whatever. You need to learn how to lube things up and keep it, functioning if it's on a job site for a period of time. But much cheaper, much more reliable to just rent in, hire in equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that 100%, and that's exactly what we teach in the course. And it just makes so much sense. It's humans, we're such gatherers. We like to gather and accumulate stuff, and equipment's kind of this shiny thing that we can buy and own. But in 90% of cases, it's better to just rent what you need when you need it, unless if you're really doing a huge project and one machine is going to suffice for a lot of things. Then it can make sense. But
or you want to be doing this all the time. Like, I don't want to be driving equipment all the time. Like, I do 2 projects a year. It's about kind of my limit. It's sometimes more if they're smaller, but I don't want to be sitting on one of those things for long periods of time. And I don't like being a mechanic. I don't like, wrenching on stuff.
I'd say that's the biggest one for me.
I have to wrench on my own tractor enough as it is. Like, I don't want more things that'll break.
Yeah. And an interesting comment from Ben here. He figured out he could rent an excavator and dig 100,000-gallon pond for the price of 1 year of California fire insurance. Amazing. And that's why you can still get fire insurance in California.
Yeah, right.
Which in some places is going away and will be more and more. So that really helps paint that value proposition, and then you get all the benefits of that pond as well, rather than just
this is
money to insurance companies.
This is something I get all the time. Oh, it's like you're using all this diesel and all this stuff to do these things, and I'm like, that's probably the best investment of diesel energy you can do is to do these earthworks that are integrated in the landscape that'll just be there for centuries and create abundance forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Building on the equipment question, a question from our friend Susan Richmond. I'd love to hear what equipment you have for seed cleaning other than humans threshing.
Yeah, there's a variety of things. It's small scale. It's kind of tricky because most seed cleaning equipment's either really expensive or large scale, you know. So we've developed a variety of kind of size appropriate equipment. Everything from threshers that are basically repurposed wood chippers that I change the speed on and change the beater bars on for threshing, say, grain out of hulls, or threshing beans out of their pods. So you want something soft enough that it'll like get the plant material away from the seed. And then so that's the trickiest bit. And then it's basically with a combination of box fans and screens, you can clean most things, most larger seeds, you know, beans, corn, peas, radish, you know, beets, all that kind of stuff. The trickier ones are the very, very small seeds like lettuce and basil and stuff like that. And if you're careful, you can do that with screens, different size screens. So like ones will let the small stuff and the seeds fall through and then get rid of the big chaff. And then another one will hold the seeds back and let the really small stuff fall through, and then winnow the rest of that. I have just built a seed cleaner for small seeds that's called a zigzag cleaner. And it's basically you pour the seeds in and they ricochet off these little bumpers and fall down the chute. And then off to the side, there's a vacuum that's sucking. And so the light chaff doesn't fall down, it gets sucked back up and into this other chamber. And then the heavier seeds fall straight down, and you can adjust the amount of vacuum with a little damper plate. So you can look up the zigzag seed cleaner, and there's plans for that and stuff. So I've built a number of variety, small scale seed cleaning. Like we have a corn deshucker. We have, I made a grinder that with rubber plates, like a meat grinder kind of thing, a hopper, or a corn grinder has a hopper and then two plates that rub on one another, and you put latex rubber on that and it kind of rubs the hulls off of things. So yeah, just small scale ingenuity kind of things, and make it work. And for a lot of stuff, like the seeds don't have to be super clean to store them. You just want to downsize the biomass and put them in storage bags, you know, paper bags, so they can breathe, and then put them in a cool, dark place. And for home use, like they can be pretty, you know, not very clean at all, and you just like scatter out the seeds. For packaging it up and stuff, we try and have them pretty clean, put it out there. But come to one of our workshops, we'll teach you seed saving, and get involved, and it's fun to do as a group. So with the Salish Seed Guild, part of the goal is to teach people about seed saving, but also have these small scale seed cleaning equipment and stuff available to the community to be able to do. You know, they used to have threshing bees where people would get together as a community and process seeds. So it's fun. It's a community engagement event.
Nice. Should we try a live question? If I know there's so many good questions here, and they just keep coming.
Try to look at them all.
Yeah. Well, if remember anybody, if you want to do a live like question, raise your hand and we'll unmute you. All right. Oh, we got one from Susan. Hey, Susan.
Hey, I just wanted to say really fast, Brian, you exceeded my expectations. The whole idea about my question, because I've been researching this, is so much of it is so easy, really. And just to inspire people, since we Zach, of course, followed this up with the big equipment, but seed cleaning gives us so much power. And I've been really thinking a lot about it, not just in terms of what's marketable, but just providing natural seed, natural or local wild flowers for the mulching that comes with doing the water bodies, you know, and grasses. So one piece though that I am investigating is called a grass grabber. It's from Australia and it's totally man driven. And it's super impressive. So I'll share that when I'll just send you a link to it in Water Stories on the community. But thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Why don't we get to Tim here and then we'll do the other questions. Hey, Tim.
Hello?
Hey.
Hello.
Okay. We had a very wet winter last winter, and this year, but for some reason, our well and many wells in the area are going dry because so much water is being taken out of it. I'm trying to retain more water on my land. I want to do some swales, but we're just starting the rainy season. So I'm wondering if it's okay to make swales when the rainy season's starting or even during the rainy season without causing erosion that's going to just wash all the soil away.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a number of problems working with earthwork stuff in the wet times. One is you over compact the soils. It's really messy and it takes way longer to do. So my advice is not to do it in the wet seasons, to observe and interact and kind of make plans during the wet season and then wait for the drier times to be able to work. If it's too dry, the soil gets really rock hard and it's really hard to work. If it's too wet, it just gets sloshy and you can't really deal with the stuff. You spend a lot of time just kind of getting equipment unstuck and cleaning equipment and all this is just not worth it. So kind of in that middle, so it's like later in the spring or you know, just at the end of summer, right before the rains come here, you know, that's typically when I would approach a project. It's better if it's drier than wet.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you so
absolutely.
much.
Absolutely. To echo that, if it's wet, the best you can hope for is that it's way more expensive and messy and doesn't end in as good of a result. The worst you can experience is all sorts of erosion issues, catastrophe, etc. It's something where really just choosing the right time of year for your specific context is essential. Now, in a very few places, the wet season is the time to work because every other time it's just too hard and too dry. But for the vast majority of climates, you really don't want to be working in the wet season because it has some real risk inherent and always additional cost.
Thank you.
Zach has a really good story about a certain excavator getting stuck deep in the mud in Montana.
Yeah, you
rain,
don't want to do
do
that.
that.
That's a story I share in the course, but it's you can really get into a nightmare scenario quicker than you might imagine by trying to do work in the wet season.
Yeah, you remember in the video and maybe a couple of the photos of my presentation, like there was unfinished soil around the pond because I got it dug just right before the wet and then the rains came and it was just like, I gotta stop, you know, I can't be gooing around. It's like it trashes out your soil structure. So especially at that finish, like you can't get a nice grade and leave it nice and fluffy. It just like, it'll take years to rebound from that kind of situation versus just wait, you know, after that, I just went and scattered hay all over everything to try and just hold it so that the erosion, but it was basically, I had to stop. It's just gonna be beating your head against the wall, cleaning equipment and sliding around, getting equipment stuck.
Every time I've tried it, I've regretted it. I'll say it that
Seems
much.
seems like the consensus is don't do it. All right, cool. Well, thanks for the question, Tim. I'm gonna hop this over to Amelia. She has some more pond questions. So Amelia, let me allow you to talk here. All right, good to have you on.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to all of you. This is really amazing. So I have a pretty steep property in Northwest Oregon, and my main concern is pond failure and washouts. And I just wondered if you could speak to that. And also, I'm really curious about your Hugelkultur experience in Western Washington.
Yeah, and just without knowing a whole lot about your context, just in general, like the steeper the slope gets, the more challenging water bodies become. And you really do have to start looking out for, making sure that they're built right, number one, or looking at your soils, making sure they're not going to blow out, looking at what your catchment and the major rain events are that you're going to possibly be experiencing. And so they're more of the more challenging areas to work in. But that being said, you can find locations where they're feasible, depending upon your soils and your contours and how much money you want to throw at the project, all of those kind of things. I'm sure Zach has a lot to add to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of it. It really comes down to geology, catchment, spillway. There's a lot of details that go into building a proper water body. And you see a lot of water bodies from amateur to professional that you just know aren't going to hold up, that you know are going to, last until the first 100-year rain event or not even. And so I think ponds get a really bad rap for blowouts, for failures. This is why all of the regulation that makes it very difficult to do this work is in place, because there have been a bunch of poorly built ponds where the builder didn't really pay attention to the geology and the land and the other factors that are critical for success. Then you get a big amount of water on a steep hillside, and that's a situation where you can have blowout. But when you understand the soils and the details to it's things like, trying to build the pond when it's too wet, you can do everything else right and have dam failure from that one thing. Or trying to build the pond when it's too dry, you can do everything right and have failure from that one thing. So it's hard to build a proper pond, and that's why we don't offer a pond building course 101, because you can't build a pond well without reading the landscape, without understanding the soils, without reading the movements of water on the land. And that's why I think you see so many bad ponds, and they generally have such a bad rap, because there's just a lot of poorly built or incomplete water bodies out there.
Thanks. And the Hugel experience in the Northwest, I'd love to hear a little about that.
Yeah, Hugelkultur's gotten like a trendy kind of a trendy name, and it's caught on a lot of different ways. It's really has a great role in a lot of my projects, because we do have a lot of woody material that you have to deal with. And so, I've seen people try and do Hugelkulturs and they have to go find woody material to bring in. I'm like, it's maybe not right for your context if you have to go scrounge up woody material. But if you're dealing with like clearing a site, or you have a lot of down trees, you want to deal with fire mitigation issues of like a lot of fuel on the forest floor, Hugelkultur is a great option for that. And like the first Hugelkultur we put in was maybe 18 years ago or something. decent size, probably about 75 foot long, 6 or 8 feet tall originally. And I did all kinds of mistakes with that. So, I planted trees right into it pretty much immediately. I put, it's going to be this great growing bed and stuff. I planted all kinds of stuff in there, and they all settled and shifted and died. And it was kind of a mess. I didn't realize it was going to be like an incredible creature habitat. So we had skunks and bees and rats and stuff that all loved burrowing into it and living there. And, just called it home. So you have to realize that these are not the silver bullet that a lot of people make them out to be, but they really do have a role in the landscape, to become like a giant nutrient moisture flywheel that absorbs moisture over the wet months and gives it off over the summer. And basically it's like a giant compost pile that allows that woody debris to slowly break down and turn into soil. So you get it in contact with the soil, the fungal communities, that then start breaking everything down. After a few, you could do it. Normally I do a cover crop now, immediately let that run several years. And that cover crop can be a huge mix, everything from ryegrass to turnips to kale to, sunflowers. Just throw, like, we're seed savers, right? We just go in and grab handfuls of seeds and just throw it in a big bucket and stir it up and throw it out there. So we get I love Sepp Holzer's approach, just like throw the seeds out and see what comes up and let the seeds teach you where they want to be. And you got disturbed soil, there's an opportunity to put seeds out. And so we, some of the best cabbages, the best turnips, the best parsnips all come out of these Hugelkultur, just wild seeding events. And then after several years, that'll settle down and kind of stabilize. The creatures will kind of mellow out a little bit, and then you can start planting in other more perennial long-term things into that system. So yeah, and I'm sure Zach has observations on Hugelkulturs too. They're great in the Northwest because we have that decay cycle, and everything has that moment to just like settle and decay, and we have a lot of biomass.
Yeah, I think that's spot on too, saying that they're great and they're not a silver bullet. I think in a way, so much of a big deal has been made about Hugelkultur by certain people that people think it's the solution to all of your problems in life, or, is going to create this amazing garden bed or all these different things. I've really started to view it in working with Sepp and in my own projects as a waste management strategy. Yep. It is a way to take waste and turn it into a resource. It is not going to be, the best garden bed you've ever had, or all these different things that you might hear about it, or a garden bed that you don't need to irrigate anywhere ever. It is none of those things, but it is a very good strategy for dealing with a bunch of woody waste. And it is particularly good in climates that have a long dry season and a long wet season. So the Pacific Northwest makes a ton of sense for Hugelkultur, but it is very much a waste management strategy. People are oftentimes surprised when I say that at Sepp's new farm, there is one area with Hugelkultur and everything else is other techniques. People think Sepp Holzer and they think Hugelkultur, but it's a tiny little, it's like Sepp Holzer's recycling. All of Sepp's work has to do with water and nature and integrative land management. And then he's got this recycling system also that has become really common and people think of as the main thing. So as long as you just have realistic expectations, a lot of times they will have a Hugelkultur and they'll end up taking it apart and using that soil down the road. Yep. So the Hugelkultur woody waste for 5-10 years, and then they'll apply it as soil to terraces or where they might want to improve the soil.
I'll add, onto that, another trendy thing is biochar. And people are going, they're trying to do this fire mitigation stuff. Oh, let's just burn it all. And I'm like, yeah, biochar, it's another one of these things that's like, oh, this is the silver bullet. It's going to sequester carbon and it's going to build soil. It's going to be the best thing ever. And like, again, it's context oriented. The biochar works really good in the tropics and the subtropics. And it's, in my experience, and I've been playing with it for 20 years, not so beneficial and as productive as it is in the tropics here in the Pacific Northwest. So, and you're burning this biomass, it's all going, like 60 to 80% of that is immediately going up into the atmosphere. And it's a lot of material handling to burn it and deal with the char, all this stuff, where hugelkultur makes a lot more sense. Like, you're putting it in contact with the earth, you're feeding the fungal communities that are building a life regenerative cycle within that system. And it's a positive feedback loop where this biochar is like this destructive kind of explosive event that, you know, may or may not have like these kind of positive feedback loop benefits that you see. So I'm a big fan, where appropriate, to integrate hugelkulturs. Like that top pond we just did, I put like right out of the spillway, kind of off contour, a hugelkultur that will like take that water as it flows, so wick it up into that woody biomass that's kind of, you know, sunken in contact with the earth, and hold that for longer through the dry periods, and slow release that through the small water cycle into the surrounding environment. And just to touch on, I saw a comment in here of like, what's the problem with a hugel swale? So there's context. So if you have a steeper slope and you put in a swale and you put a hugelkultur on the downhill side of that, you have a potential to blow, you know, wood floats, right? So there is a potential, if it's not sunken down in and really tied in with a lot of soil, there's a potential to blow out that wood with a lot of water backed up behind it. It'd have to be a pretty extreme event for me to really see that happening, but it's a potential. The other thing about these hugelkulturs is that if they're built up directly on contour, they're a large berm. Usually I put them in, they're pretty big size berm. They have the potential to back up frost or cold air. And so if they're directly on contour, you create a frost pocket right at the base of them. And so typically I will put them slightly off contour, so the water rubs up against it and maybe soaks into the ditch that all the woody debris is put into. I always dig down, you know, a couple of feet before I put in my woody debris, so it can soak in, but it's allowed that frosty air to flow off, and it allows the water to rub up against it, but then flow on its way. So it's just slightly off contour so that you can get that air and water movement.
Awesome. Great succinct summary of that. While we're on biochar, a lot of people were really intrigued by your wetland filter system that you made, and they were wondering specifically if the biochar needs to be replaced, how often. Let's see, here it is. Do you change the charcoal, or the biochar? How often do you, and how do you treat the biochar you are disposing after it filtered and soaked all the toxins?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not sure of an exact answer to that because, you know, we've never really changed it on there, and we have not really, you know, tested it recently. I guess the testing was done through connection with the school, what was Huxley School in the Environment. There's some students that came out and did some you know, testing on it, and so we haven't remade that connection. I would imagine the biochar could last quite a long time, probably until it clogs up and water stops flowing through it. So you know, they have activated carbon water filters for backpacking and other things like that, household, filters, they last a good long time. And what tells that they're bad is the water stops flowing through it. So that would be my assumption on that system. It's a decent volume, but there's the 2 barrels with the standpipes, and there's maybe, I don't know, 3/4 of those barrels are full with the char, so that each of the char has a lot of surface area. So it's like these micropores of crystalline structure that has that surface area. So that water's moving through all of that surface area. As to what do you do with it? So most of what we were trying to filter out was like herbicides, pesticides, Roundup, that kind of stuff. I would probably just dry out the char and burn it like charcoal. I don't know. Probably get rid of that. It's not like heavy metals or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, really interesting, cool system that you guys built there.
I was amazed how simple it was and how effective it was. And other clients, like we take water. I look at roadways as a water harvesting feature to bring water onto landscapes, and you're always going, oh, you're getting the water from a culvert on the roadway. Like, just run it through. You don't even have to be that elaborate. Just run it through a simple reed bed filter, and it filters out, sediments and light contaminants that come off roadways.
Yeah, simple things that work. It's we need more of it in the world. Another question, combining a few questions together. In these examples, were any water rights, docks, permits, etc. needed? And I think it's good to tie that into any thoughts on how land use policy could support better water stories. I think could better support water stories, or water cycle restoration. We could open it to.
Yeah, so that's a good one. It always comes up. It's it's probably some of the biggest obstacles to doing this work, that people are intimidated by all the policies and legal stuff that come up. Basically, I'm of the persuasion that I just ask forgiveness and not permission, and just go ahead and do it. It might get me into trouble at some point, but I feel like I'm doing the right thing for the environment. I'm doing the right thing for the landscape and for the long health, all of these systems. And I think that's not for everybody, but it's the kind of thing, like if I do a design consult for people, I say, these kind of things, they might need permits, they might need engineering, you might need to talk to somebody, and then it's kind of up to the client of whether they want to go that route or they want to, ask forgiveness and not permission kind of route. I did have one client that really wanted to go the permitting route, and he was actually a Army Corps of Engineers lawyer, retired, and he's went down that road of you get a wetland delineation and started doing with the permitting and all this stuff, and he got passed from one department to the next department to the next department, and after 3 years after doing his initial design proposal, he basically decided it would, the departments basically were paid to say no, is what he said. And they kept passing him from one to the next, and he just decided to go ahead and do some things anyways. And a lot of these smaller features, they really don't need permitting. These small soakage systems, these terraces, these infiltration basins, Hugelkulturs, like all of these things really don't need permitting. It's just when you get into larger water bodies, and every county is different. So every place has its own kind of water management council or whatever you call it. And some places, if it's under a certain size or a certain depth, then you don't need, permitting. If it's over that size, then maybe you need permitting. If it's in a tricky location or adjoining a waterway, then maybe you need engineering and permitting. So every context is completely different. And I'm generally in the mindset that multiple small elements in a system are better than one large element in that system. And so you can get around these by just breaking up these elements and tying them together into the, designing the whole space.
Yeah, and a lot of these rules are not really designed to keep good people from doing good work. They're designed to keep bad people from doing bad work, but they're not written in a way that recognizes that people might do good work in waterways or in ecosystems. And so I want to give a shout out to Plug Oregon, which was started by a number of water story students and former clients of ours and other people that are really looking to, how do we actually change the policy in Oregon to allow these kinds of things to take place? Because I think in reality, the projects that are happening, good, bad, or ugly, they're happening without the proper permissions. A lot of times, if you go down the permission route, the permissions might cost every bit as much as the project, sometimes more. Sometimes you might never be able to get them. And just to share, how broken our regulatory system is, I was recently working for the Department of Defense, and they were saying we would rather ask forgiveness than permission. They are the authorizing body, and they still don't want to have to deal with the permitting process. They'd rather go through with it and then deal with it if it becomes a problem. So that was real eye-opening to me to see this approach that people with civil courage are taking to do good work. Even people that are embedded in the system say basically, yeah, this is the only way to get things done these days.
Yeah, and we really need more examples, and we need, that show there is a better way to recharge our aquifers, to reconnect the water to the earth body, to rejoin. The conventional wisdom is to drain the farmland and then irrigate all summer long out of the aquifer. It's like, what if we had more water integrated landscapes, so we don't have to be drilling deeper into our aquifer and depleting the water seasonal flow out of the salmon spawning streams and all the rest of this, that it's all connected. And the policies need to change, but for the policies to change, you have to have examples of how a change would benefit everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And without those examples, you can't really make a good case for why it should be changed. And this kind of leads into our next question. You see everything that you're doing there, that if you were trying to do it properly, you'd have all sorts of issues. But then you got the gravel pit right next door, just ripping up the earth, and no one's giving them problems.
Yeah.
So a couple of people asked about that. Is the mining pit next to your Inspiration Farm draining your land, or are your water features buffering this effect? And if you have a plan for the soon to be closed gravel pit.
Yeah, so good question. And it's bubbling up more and more frequently. So the gravel pit was due, they had a permit until the year 2020. So it was supposed to close and get remediated. And when we bought this property, we got a file from the previous owners saying, here's the gravel pit remediation plan. It's supposed to turn into Lake Laurel, to the back of us. So they filed for a permit extension in 2020. And, there was a comment period and all this stuff. And so we made comments, but of course they don't listen to those. They're just a formality. And so now they got a permit. So they're actually mining gravel below the water table in that. So it's a big hole. It's below our water table. There, you know, it's potentially, it open, you know, daylights that aquifer and opens it into contaminants that can get into that and flow into the surrounding aquifer. So there's a good case for me to be able to rally on adjoining properties in an effort to, okay, that's enough. Let's close this down and, you know, start the remediation plan. It's challenging. There's 5 different interests that own rights in that mine. So it's not just dealing with one company. There's 5 different companies that pull out of there. It is not draining our land per se. There's a big berm on the back part of our property that goes along, and there's big cottonwood trees and alders and maples and stuff growing up on there. And my feeling is they pushed all the topsoil off into these big berms when they opened up that mine. And so essentially that creates this buffer that's treed, that's actually at the highest point of our landscape. And that is part of why we get so much water onto our landscape. Is that water soaks down through that, it's hitting some kind of clay layer, and then it's sheeting out onto our property. So my concern is in that mitigation plan that they might take that topsoil and respread it back out and pull down a bunch of those trees, and that might change the way the water flows onto our site. So yeah, it's on my radar as something that I need to work on. And then I have been talking to a number of neighbors in the area that are interested in having, I mean, it's noisy, it's dusty, there's big trucks coming and going. They're below our water table. You know, there's a number of reasons why, like, that's enough. And I'd love to be involved in the design for the, you know, mitigation of that. It was like, there could be a lovely lake there. It could be reforested. It could be, have a walking trail around it, and, you know, all these cool terraces and create habitat for the whole community. So it'd be a great project.
Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can bend the ears of the right people.
Yeah, the regenerate Cascadia tour, we walked our property and then we popped over the hill and looked at that. And I'm like, look at this. And they're like, ooh, let's sink our teeth into this.
Nice.
So, but I have a feeling it'll involve, you know, lawyers and some kind of tooth pulling to get people to make a move on it.
Awesome.
Yeah, shout out to Julia's group, I guess, Plug Oregon. That looks really exciting to change the laws to support decentralized water retention. That is so needed.
Yeah.
So maybe we could do our part to support that.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, do you have any other questions you want to answer, or should we
should wrap up soon. I think we got time for maybe 1 or 2 more. And I see Amelia has some questions about funding.
Yeah, I guess we could unmute her. She got her hand raised. Okay, Amelia, you are. Wait, let me unmute you. Oh. Okay, now Amelia's unmuted. Good.
Hi again.
Hi.
My question is, have you worked with any kind of USDA or NRCS grants for any of this, including like a conservation innovation grants?
I personally have not. We looked for a couple of clients, we looked into them, a couple of different options, and they didn't really seem like a good fit for the projects. I know people that have done projects that it was a better fit. Oftentimes my experience with grants is like, it sounds like a good idea to go after them. It's a you really have to know how to navigate those grant structures, or have somebody on the inside that's really helps you kind of navigate that path. And then there's often a lot of strings attached, like things that you have to do and benchmarks that you have to make and things you have to document all along the way. So a lot of times that puts people off on like having that ongoing kind of relationship in doing those projects. That being said, I have worked with the conservation district on a number of other kind of aspects. There's a big effort to be doing more agroforestry systems. So the conservation districts does have access to federal funds to help convert conventional farms into more agroforestry integrated farms. And I have worked with one of our conservation districts managers on some of those projects, not as a designer, but as a nursery tree salesman, and a consultant on species and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm sure, Zach, you've probably have more experience on grants and stuff.
Yeah, I have similar experiences in that we've had a lot of projects try and pursue them, and I don't think any actually move forward with them. Of the grants that are available, the EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, they have the most closely related cost shares. And I've even had some clients get some of those and end up turning them down because, for example, they had some to create some water bodies to reduce erosion, but then the place that they wanted us to put those water bodies made no sense in the landscape. So even though he got the funding for them, he ended up turning it down. That's only available to farmers, people filing a Schedule F. I think a lot of it comes down to the culture of the granting agency or the regulatory agency. And I think in many ways, the United States is the most behind in terms of developing a progressive grant structure. The grants that are available are for all of the existing things. Like, I can't tell you how many people have gotten one of those USDA ag grants for a greenhouse and never grew a crop in it. They used it as a storage facility or whatever. And just, yeah. But whereas when we go into places like Europe, I think the situation is getting so bad that they're beginning to be more progressive. And so one of our Water Stories students submitted a bunch of different grants, a bunch of the standard stuff that normally gets funded. And then they submitted one crazy idea that they said, there's no way this is going to get funded, but this is what I'd like to do. And so they submitted a grant for also these beaver dam analogs and flood control. And that was the only grant that got funded. They actually turned down all of the normal ones because they are realizing, our current strategies aren't working. We need to try new stuff. So I think in Europe, there's a lot more accessibility to grants, and the culture, at least in some of the places, is a little bit more progressive and forward thinking as far as let's try some new strategies. And then in other areas, the structures are very entrenched and they keep funding the same kind of projects again and again and expecting different results.
Yeah. The other thing I think I would mention on grants is a lot of times it puts the timeline so far off. Like you have to fill out the paperwork and and then wait and then hear and then review and so the clients often want to I want to do this now, and they don't want to wait for that. And so they're more prone to just move ahead without, on their own without any existing funding. The other thing is a lot of times you have to frame it in a whole different way. Like you don't put in a water body, you put in a flood mitigation, pool, or you don't put in a swale, you put in a water a rain garden is what you put in, so you have to change your terminology. You have to fit with their structure that they already have, and there's a lot that goes into that aspect of it.
How much do these projects typically run for people that are of meager means?
A lot of it depends on how they're done. But you know, when people hire us for a project, for example, I say the typical project is $20,000 to $200,000. Now that's a wide range, but we're doing a wide range of things. Sometimes projects are more, sometimes projects are less. But so it's a significant but not crazy expense. Now there are all these ways that you can do things differently for different places. You know, in some places we're doing things entirely with labor of the people living there, and so the cost situation is totally different. Whereas in places that are more affluent, that can afford the machinery, that's where you get into these, you know, relatively higher price ranges. But still, when you look at what you're getting for the amount of money and the alternatives available, it's actually very economical. And we have a lot of young families that don't have a lot of means, but this is something they value, and it's just within their means, and they're going to work with it to get full value out of it. And when you think of some of the things, you know, for example, we put in a pretty big project in California. It's probably $250,000, let's call it. It saved the house twice, once from flood and then again from landslide, or sorry, once from fire and then again from landslide. And so the $200,000 investment, it's a big investment, but it saved a $5 million house twice, in a way that insurance couldn't possibly. So there's a lot of different strategies. And then if you're doing the work yourself, you know, to rent a machine for a week to build a water body, that might be $2,000 if you know what you're doing. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach the cost scenario.
Yeah, phased implementation, you know, taking projects bite at a time. You know, the return on investment is like, you can't even calculate the return on investment, because you put these things in and they're going to go for, you know, potentially centuries and just get better and better. So that's something, like, I never have to really sell a project to a client. They're on board. They're ready to go. They're having to deal with floods, fires, and droughts. And so, and they're wanting to grow crops, or they're, you know, pumping water, you know, huge electrical and mechanical repair expense into their system. And they know that's not sustainable with rising electric prices and decreasing water tables. So yeah, it sells itself if people can see on the ground what they're getting, and what, you know, how fast it changes things. Just to give another example, so that the top pond project that we did here earlier this summer, like, I rented an excavator. I have a tractor. The excavator was $1,000 basically for the week, another $300 or $400 in diesel. And we did a workshop out of it, which actually made it take longer, but, you know, because they're explaining things, but, you know, people got that skill, and I got extra hands on that project. But, you know, all told, that project might have been, you know, $3,000 to $4,000 or something if you're doing it yourself and just renting the equipment.
Cool. Thanks for the question. All right. Should we do one more from Shalia, or
Shadaya, I think.
Shadaya. Okay, my bad. All right, Shadaya. I'm going to unmute you. Talking is permitted. Oh, there we go. Hey, Shadaya.
Am I
Yep,
muted or not?
Unmute. Oh, you're
No,
unmuted.
we hear you.
You hear me? Great. Hi, Zach. Brian, I completely hear what you say about the return on investment. But I was just wondering, in your experience, I mean, I think you're totally right. Small, lots of little things is the way to go. But if you have got very small amounts of money and you're trying to kind of get the biggest bang for your buck, what, in your experience, would be the best thing to kind of like start with?
Build soil, create more organic rich soil. I think like all these earthworks things are really great and glamorous and have like a dramatic impact. And in the right context, they really work well. But like the soil is your biggest container for water. Like if you can increase your soil's organic content by 1%, you hold an additional 20,000+ gallons of water per acre. So building soil is always the easiest thing, through cover crop, through animal grazing management practices, planting trees. Those kind of things can be implemented on many different landscapes fairly inexpensively and easily. That being said, if you want to go towards earthworks type things, the smaller interventions, like when I started, I just had a tractor, or sometimes I rented a tractor, but when I had my own, I just did what I could with what I had. So I would just put in a contour swale line and see what that did. I'd scoop out a little infiltration basin and see what that did. As I learned and grew and realized the importance and the effect of these things, then I would, save my pennies and rent the equipment and do a bigger project. So you start with where you are with what you have and do stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm doing at the moment, is working with animal impact. I should say I'm not actually in Oregon. I'm in the south of Portugal. So we have 6 months without rain, lots of hot sun, and the soils here are really degraded. So although I am trying to build soil, it's a really slow process and hampered by lack of moisture. I mean, it's a brittle environment.
Yeah.
And animal impact is very expensive.
Yeah, cover crops, mulches, creating shade habitats, cooling that soil so that the cooler soil holds more moisture.
Yes,
more
it all
conducive.
takes time. That's the thing. But it's just, yeah, I mean, it's a slow process because, of course, everything grows really slowly because there isn't very much moisture.
Yeah,
So,
just looking for those really hardy species that will get established in your area. Those hardy, thorny, nitrogen-fixing species that can get up and going and handle browse pressure.
yes, I mean, yes. I mean, I'm doing all of that. I just wondered if there was anything else that, because I've been thinking about hiring in some machinery or whether to get someone to come and do some things for me and just sort of say, okay, well, if I was going to budget X amount, what should I spend it on?
Well, and there's simple, effective things like one rock dams, where you're just laying one rock high across on contour in your landscape that help slow water when it does come. It catch biomass. They build soil behind that. Laying sticks or stones on contour is like a really simple thing that you can just wander around and do. Again, it really depends on your context and your land, and it takes looking at it closely and coming up at like where the acupressure points are to put larger features, where you can put a terrace line or a swale line or a infiltration basin, those kind of things. But again, numerous smaller interventions are often the simplest.
Mm.
And
Great, thank you.
You really touched on a big part of this for me, Shadiah, is it's a trade of time versus money. Which of the resource do you have more of and less of? There are lots of small, simple things that you can do. Small little swales, small infiltration basins, rock check dams, spreading water out, that over a long time frame will make a very big difference. And then there are these other big changes that we can make that in 1 year create a big difference that have all of this embedded cost and energy upfront in the equipment time.
Yeah.
So in your situation, what I could see is do lots of little things with a shovel for a while and live with those for a winter and see what's most effective, so that when you come back next summer to maybe do a little bit of work faster with the machine, you know what was actually the most advantageous given your context, both with your specific land and what you want to do there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
And I
Thanks,
think with that, we're more than 2 hours in, so we should start bringing things to a close.
Close it out.
Brian, we'll leave you with some last final comments. But I want to say just first, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for being part of the Water Stories community. You've been a real stalwart at all of our events and professional development sessions and the office hours, and it's been very much appreciated. And really just so inspired by everything you're doing at your own place and throughout the Pacific Northwest. I think it really illuminates that, you know, we don't need to come from a certain background. We don't need to have a certain trajectory to be able to engage in this work in a really meaningful way. You know, you look at your journey from artist to water cycle restoration professional, and it wasn't over that long of a period of time, and you're doing a really exceptional job of it. So I want to commend you for that, and just also offer it up as something that anyone in this call, you know, within a year's time or a couple of years' time, you could be doing this as a profession, or you could be doing it as a hobby or as an advocate. It's a really fulfilling way to engage with others, whether on a community, professional, or personal level. And it can happen a lot quicker than you might imagine.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Thanks for that, Zach. That it's well received, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of that. I want to thank both you and Raleigh for putting this together, and all your other webinars that you put together and bring such amazing guests on to share in this space. And yeah, I just, you know, want to encourage other people, you know, follow your passion and see where it leads. And, you know, don't be afraid to start. Like, so many people get stuck in that analysis paralysis space. Just like, I want to do it right, so I'm not going to start until I know how to do it right. But just be the kid in the sandbox and just play, you know, and get your hands dirty and start small and build confidence and just go from there. So it's a really fun journey, and you can share it with your friends and families and neighbors, and help create a more resilient culture and world. I think, you know, the world really needs it right now. So time for everyone to step up.
And right. Well, thank you, Brian, so much for coming on, and thanks, Zach, for doing so much on the webinar and everything. I guess we're going to close it out. Everyone who signed up is going to get a replay. We had about 200 people show up live, so that was fantastic. All right, everybody. Well, keep an eye on your inbox. This will be posted on the Water Stories community later, and we'll send everybody an email. But appreciate everybody's time. Have an awesome week, and we will talk to you all later. Take care, everybody.
All right, thanks.
Right.